There's no denying the impact j.r.r. Tolkien has had on literature, fantasy, and countless hearts and minds. The 2019 biopic of the author's life, starring Nicholas Hoult and Lily Collins, is for the most part pretty accurate, but there are definitely a few things that the movie gets pretty wrong. Everyone who's ever had a crush on someone knows just how awkward it gets, and in the film, it gets super awkward when Tolkien takes Edith out to a fancy restaurant. At first, she's a little horrified it's such a fancy place, and there she is without a hat. Clearly, she's not fitting in among all the other fancy ladies, and she's worried. He brushes off her concern, they chat for a little bit, and then out of nowhere, she starts throwing sugar cubes at some of the women she was just admiring. What? Why?
Bend the forks, smash the bottles and burn the corks, chip the glasses and crack the plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates!
There's a strain of truth here. Tossing sugar cubes at strangers is something the couple is known to have actually done, but not quite in the context of a fancy restaurant setting. According to biographical sources, one of the couple's favorite pre-university pastimes was to head to a rooftop tea house in Birmingham, take sugar lumps out of a bowl, and throw them at people walking below them, particularly people sporting fancy hats. They'd go from table to table looting and throwing sugar, apparently having the time of their lives. While that seems like a very strange thing to spend an afternoon doing for people today, you had to get creative in the days before video games. At one point in the Tolkien movie, John gets summoned to the offices of the powers that be in Oxford. There, he finds out that he's lost his scholarship because of poor grades and won't be able to afford to stay in school. But according to the Tolkien Society, he never did quite that badly. For his initial foray into the university system, Tolkien studied Old English, the classics, and Germanic languages. Partway through, he scored a second-class degree, which means he wasn't at the top of his class, but was far from the bottom. Tolkien saw his second-class degree as pretty disappointing, but it wasn't the end of the world for him or his academic career. One field he excelled in above all others was philology, the part of his studies that involved the study of the structure of language. Realizing his aptitude for the field, he made the decision to switch from classics to English language and literature. The rest is history, or the history of Middle-earth. The Tolkien biopic is all about suggestion, painting dragons and fantastic creatures into the shadows where an imaginative mind might have seen and been inspired by them. One of the clearest inspirations the movie shows us is seen during a trip John and Edith take to an opera by Richard Wagner, where the appearance of an important ring is given a lot of weight. It was in the works of Wagner, the film implies, that Tolkien got the idea for the all-powerful One Ring that would later come to such prominence in his own works.
It began with the forging of the Great Rings.
There's only one problem. It's just not true. According to The New Yorker, Tolkien condemned the idea that there was any connection between his rings and Wagner's, once saying, "Both rings were round, and there the resemblance ceased." Jonathan Witt, senior fellow at the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture, has pointed out that magical rings are a common concept in world mythology, so it's more accurate to say both Tolkien and Wagner were influenced by Old Norse sagas and other stories.
Could you write 5,000 words on the influence of Norse elements in Gawain?
Other sources claim that Tolkien's idea to include a magical ring in his work came from a story he was once told during an archaeological dig in Gloucestershire of an old ring being uncovered in a field that had previously been the site of a Roman temple. The Tolkien film's relationship between Tolkien and Edith Bratt is one of awkward childhood glances, teasing conversations, and blushing when their hands touch. But according to biographers, Tolkien and Edith, who were 16 and 19 when they met respectively, were good friends almost from the moment they first became acquainted with each other, and it wasn't long before love was in the air.
Go on, Sam. Ask Rosie for a dance. I think I'll just have another ale. Oh, no you don't.
They didn't just sneak glances at each other while she played the piano. They got up to all kinds of shenanigans. All that food that was disappearing from the kitchens? That was Edith piling snacks and treats into a basket Tolkien lowered from his window. Even though the relationship was discouraged as being improper, Tolkien and Edith were the kind of friends that made for lasting, lifelong partners. They talked through the nights, devised a special whistle to communicate, and even arranged to head out into the countryside on the weekends and meet up once they were out of their guardian's sight. The real reason Tolkien's guardian forbade them to see each other at one point came after an unauthorized excursion the two took into town to buy each other birthday presents. In other words, these two lovebirds hit the ground running with each other, moving beyond the stage of coy glances and suggestion at a fairly rapid pace. Take the film at face value, and you see a Tolkien who did very much what other young men his age did at the onset of World War I. He's sitting in Oxford when he hears the cries of war, and the next thing you know, he's in uniform with his friends. But the real-life Tolkien didn't quite answer the call in the same way. War was declared in August 1914, but it was almost a full year before Tolkien enlisted in the army, signing up and becoming a second lieutenant in the Lancashire Fusiliers in June 1915. And contrary to what the film depicts, he wasn't even at Oxford when war was declared. According to the j.r.r. Tolkien Encyclopedia, he was actually on vacation in Cornwall when the news broke.
War! England's at war!
So why did the real Tolkien wait? According to the Tolkien Society, he wanted to finish his degree at Oxford first, and did so in spite of the fact that his family was pressuring him to enlist. He finished up his degree in the same month he ultimately enlisted, but he wasn't immediately sent to the front lines. Instead, he spent months in England and was only sent to the front just before the Battle of the Somme, which didn't start until July 1st, 1916. Every dramatic romance film has to have that moment. You know the one, where it's not clear whether the will they, won't they couple is going to end up getting together. Maybe they'll be pulled in two separate directions by fate and bad decisions, never to see each other again. In Tolkien's version of this scene, John is getting ready to head off to war, ship looming in the background, a sense of unrequited love looming over him. But of course, Edith shows up at the last second, things are awkward, and then there's a magical kiss. Now he has a reason to come back to her. They just might make it after all. Oh, Hollywood, you've done it again. In actuality, Edith was engaged to someone else by the time Tolkien turned 21 and was allowed to speak to her again. But this didn't end up being much of an obstacle for the couple. She broke off that engagement, returned her ring, upset an entire family, converted to Catholicism, and married Tolkien, all before he ever went off to war. So he definitely had a reason to come back for Edith, with motivations that were much more substantial than the fact that they'd finally kissed. By the time he left for the field of battle, they were already together in a rock-solid marriage, one that lasted for 55 years until Edith's death in 1971. When movie Tolkien is in the trenches, he's got someone at his side, a faithful companion who's looking after him, caring for his already sick self. The man's name is Sam, and the connection is clear. This is the guy who inspired Frodo's loyal companion, Samwise Gamgee. But that's sort of a simplification of what really happened. John Garth, the Tolkien researcher and author of Tolkien and the Great War, did a ton of research into World War I, Tolkien's role in it, and the influences it had on his writing. He turned up a letter written in 1956 to an H. Cotton Minchin, which said, in part, "My Samwise is indeed largely a reflection of the English soldier. Grafted on the village boys of early days, the memory of the privates and my batmen that I knew in the 1914 war and recognized as so far superior to myself." So the character of Sam was inspired by Tolkien's fellow soldiers in general, not just one of them. We even know where the name Sam Gamgee came from, and it wasn't from the war front. According to the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, the Lord of the Rings Sam was actually named after Samson Gamgee, a surgeon from Tolkien's native Birmingham. When Tolkien wakes up in an English hospital after a nasty case of trench fever, the audience can just feel that they're in for one of those big, sad movie moments. The good news is that Edith is there waiting for him. The bad news she brings with her is that two of his best friends have been killed in battle. By the time the real Tolkien was sent back to England, he was already well aware of the deaths of his friends. Rob Gilson died on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme, news which Tolkien received in a letter from G.B. Smith, a mutual friend and member of the Tea Club and Barrovian Society. Only 5 months later, Tolkien got another letter informing him that Smith himself had died as well. Overall, he had much more time to process the tragic ends of his childhood friends than the movie of his life would have you believe. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, goes the famous starting line of Tolkien's first published work set in his world of Middle-earth. The biopic shows the author crafting the introduction in a studied and purposeful manner, inspired to pursue a storytelling career by the final letter from his closest friend. That's not really how it happened, though. In real life, Tolkien wrote that first line when inspiration struck him during an otherwise very mundane task, no encouragement from his old friend necessary. Tolkien both invented the word hobbit and wrote the first line of the Hobbit book while he was grading papers, and it just sort of popped into his head. The term came from the Old English word holbitla, which essentially means hole builder. According to John McQuillan, curator of the Morgan Library and Museum's Tolkien Maker of Middle-earth exhibit, Tolkien wrote the line down without really knowing what it meant. As the historian tells it, he had sort of a vision one day while grading examination papers and just scrawled that line on a blank page, but really didn't quite know what that was supposed to be. Of course, we all know that he eventually figured it out, and now the whole world knows what a hobbit is.
Hobbits really are amazing creatures.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.